The galaxy was quiet that morning. Too quiet. Across the vast expanse of human space, colonies and stations floated in orderly routines, unaware that a storm was about to break. In the heart of the Galactic Empire, high-ranking officers were busy preparing reports and schedules, confident that their rule was absolute. They had grown comfortable in their belief that humans could be controlled, that no one could stand against their power. But the Empire had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated the courage, skill, and determination of those who had sworn to protect humanity. 3 women generals, leaders of human forces in distant sectors, had become targets. These women were not ordinary officers. They were respected, feared, and admired, not because of their rank alone, but because of the lives they had saved, the battles they had won, and the hope they had inspired across human colonies. It began with whispers in the corridors of the Empire's capital. Rumors spread of a sudden emergency tribunal, convened to try the generals for alleged treason. The accusations were absurd fabricated stories, twisted facts, and outright lies designed to convince the galaxy that these women had betrayed humanity. No one in the Empire expected anyone to question it. After all, the Galactic Empire had authority, weapons, and influence stretching across hundreds of star systems. Their word was law. The 3 generals were summoned under the pretense of discussing urgent strategy. They arrived in uniform, calm but alert, knowing that appearances mattered. Their loyalty was beyond question, and they had served humanity with unwavering dedication. Yet the tribunal, shrouded in secrecy and intimidation, waited only to condemn them. When the shots were fired, the galaxy flinched. On distant colonies, news feeds flashed the official story. The generals had been executed for treason, a necessary action to maintain order and stability. Shock, anger, and disbelief rippled through human space. Families who had known these women, soldiers who had fought under them, and civilians who had relied on their leadership felt a deep personal loss. The Empire expected fear to spread, and in some sectors it did. People whispered in shadows, afraid to speak openly against the rulers who could crush dissent with a single command. Yet not everyone stayed silent. In quiet corners of human space, names were murmured, names of those who could not be broken by fear, who could not be silenced by cruelty. Among these names was one that had not been spoken openly for years, the Baba Yaga. The Baba Yaga was a legend, a ghost story turned reality. Those who had served alongside her knew she was more than human. She had a reputation for appearing where she was least expected and leading outcomes that no one could ignore. In her prime, she had been a strategist, a warrior, and a protector who operated beyond official channels. Her missions were dangerous, her methods precise, and her results undeniable. Many thought she had retired, vanishing into the shadows after years of service. But legends have a way of returning when the world needs them most. And the news of the generals' deaths was exactly the kind of injustice that could call her back. Across star systems, intelligence channels began to report strange occurrences, officers disappearing, communication hubs going offline, weapons depots sabotaged. At first, the Empire dismissed these incidents as accidents or isolated attacks by rebels. Yet patterns emerged, and fear began to creep into the hearts of those who believed themselves untouchable. Humanity, despite the Empire's vast reach, had not lost its spirit. Colonies that had once been quiet now buzzed with whispers of hope. People remembered the generals not just as military leaders, but as symbols of courage and resilience. Their deaths, meant to instill fear, instead sparked determination. Messages circulated through secret networks, stories of bravery and loyalty spreading like wildfire. The Empire's attempt to crush human morale had backfired. On one remote station, a young officer stared at the newsfeed, unable to comprehend the cruelty. She had trained under one of the generals, had seen her courage firsthand in battles, that had saved countless lives. Now, the memory of her mentor's guidance felt like both a comfort and a wound. Around her, colleagues shared their disbelief, yet there was also a spark in their eyes, a spark of defiance that could not be extinguished. Meanwhile, the Empire's capital thrummed with activity. Officials discussed damage control, worried that the human population might rise in revolt. They had believed that the 3 women generals were a threat only because of their leadership, but they had underestimated what their deaths could ignite. A fire of vengeance and justice. And in the shadows, the Baba Yaga watched. She had been monitoring human space, anticipating this moment even before it arrived. Every movement of the Empire, every misstep, every lapse in judgment was noted. Her mind was sharp, calculating, but also fueled by something deeper than strategy, something personal. The loss of the 3 generals was not just a political event. It was a betrayal that demanded action. Her approach was not loud. It was silent, deliberate, and precise. She did not seek attention or recognition, only justice. She began her preparations by gathering information, reaching out to trusted contacts, and studying the Empire's patterns. The Empire believed they were untouchable, but they had forgotten one truth: human ingenuity, courage, and determination could never be fully measured or controlled. Across the galaxy, ordinary humans began to notice changes. Reports of small victories against Imperial forces started surfacing. Communications disrupted, supply lines intercepted, officers questioned their loyalty as orders went unanswered. No one could explain who was behind it, but one name floated in whispered conversations: the Baba Yaga. People remembered the stories, the legends of a figure who had appeared in times of crisis and emerged victorious. Though many thought she was gone, hope returned with her name. As the first part of this story unfolded, the galaxy watched with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The Empire believed that their authority was absolute, that death could silence leaders, and that fear could control populations. They were wrong. Human determination, symbolized by the 3 fallen generals and the legendary Baba Yaga, had begun to rise. The galaxy was about to see that vengeance was not just a word, it was an action, deliberate and unstoppable. And in the quiet corners of human space, where the Empire's eyes could not reach, a spark of rebellion was being fanned into a flame. The 3 generals had been silenced, but their legacy had awakened something far greater. The story of their courage, their sacrifice, and the injustice they suffered began to ripple across human space, inspiring a new generation to stand tall. And somewhere in the shadows, the Baba Yaga prepared to deliver what the Empire could never imagine: justice for those who had been taken, and a warning that humanity would never bow quietly. As night fell on distant colonies, people paused to reflect. Some whispered prayers for the fallen, others swore vows of loyalty to the memory of the generals, and a few smiled quietly, knowing that someone, somewhere, was already moving to balance the scales. The galaxy was vast, the Empire powerful, but human courage had its own reach, a reach that no weapon could limit. By the end of the day, stories of bravery, loss, and hope had spread further than any Imperial broadcast. Messages, though unofficial, reached every colony and station, reminding humans that even in the darkest moments, they were never truly alone. They remembered the generals, mourned their loss, but also felt a renewed sense of purpose. And in the shadows, where no one dared look, the Baba Yaga's eyes gleamed with focus. The hunt had begun, and the Empire's complacency would be their downfall. Every officer, every strategist, every soldier who believed humans could be controlled would soon learn that vengeance could move faster than fear, and determination could outmatch power. The galaxy, silent only hours before, now trembled in anticipation. The story of the 3 fallen generals was only beginning, and humanity had just reminded the stars that courage and justice were forces no empire could extinguish. The galaxy was still reeling from the news of the 3 women generals. Across human space, fear and anger mixed in every colony. Some people cried openly for the loss, while others clenched their fists silently, refusing to let grief turn into despair. The generals had not been ordinary leaders. They had been symbols of courage. Their deaths felt like a wound on the soul of humanity, and the pain was raw. In the shadows, though, something unexpected began to move. Those who had known the Baba Yaga whispered her name, first as a hope, then as a certainty. She had been quiet for years, almost forgotten, but the injustice committed against the generals was enough to call her back. It was not just revenge she sought. It was restoration of balance, a reminder that human courage could never be destroyed by fear. The Empire, confident in its power, had dismissed the idea that anyone could challenge them. They believed that the killings would silence not only the generals, but the hope they inspired. They had underestimated the human spirit, the way courage spreads like wildfire, even in the darkest night. Humans were not just soldiers or citizens. They were thinkers, fighters, and survivors, capable of uniting when faced with injustice. In a small, almost forgotten colony on the edge of human space, a few officers gathered quietly. They were veterans, hardened by battles, and had served under one of the slain generals. The news had hit them hard, but instead of breaking them, it sparked determination. They spoke in whispers, sharing memories of their leader's courage and wisdom. Each story reminded them why they had fought in the first place. Each story carried a spark that the Empire could not touch. Meanwhile, the Empire tried to maintain order. Official broadcasts painted the execution as a necessary action. They claimed the generals had betrayed humanity, had made secret deals with enemy forces, and threatened stability. In many sectors, people were too afraid to speak against these lies. Fear had always been one of the Empire's strongest weapons, but even fear had limits when hope refused to die. It was during these quiet moments that the first signs of resistance began. Supplies were found missing from imperial depots. Communication lines were disrupted, and officers began disappearing without explanation. At first, the Empire assumed these were acts of rebels or ordinary sabotage. They had no reason to suspect that a single human, long thought retired, could be responsible. But the Baba Yaga had returned. She moved like a shadow, striking carefully, planning every step and leaving no trace behind. Her aim was not chaos. It was precision. Every action had meaning. Every move was calculated to weaken the Empire's hold without endangering innocent lives unnecessarily. Her style was deliberate, almost surgical. Those who had encountered her before knew she was unstoppable when she set her mind on a mission. As her actions spread, whispers of her return began circulating across human space. People spoke in hushed tones about a ghost, a phantom, someone who had once saved countless lives and disappeared into legend. They said she had no allegiance to governments or rulers, only to justice and the protection of humans. For the first time in years, humans across the galaxy felt that hope was alive, that someone was ready to fight for them, even when they could not. The Empire, meanwhile, struggled to understand what was happening. Supplies vanished mysteriously, and minor bases were sabotaged. Officers began questioning orders when communications failed. The Empire had grown used to absolute control, but the return of the Baba Yaga reminded them that power alone could not command fearless humans. The very people they had thought broken were finding courage again. Inspired by both the fallen generals and the invisible hand that was now working against the Empire. In one quiet observation station, a young intelligence officer reviewed data streams. He noticed patterns that did not make sense at first. Orders were being ignored, supplies went missing, and security cameras were being bypassed without leaving traces. Slowly, the pattern became clear. This was no ordinary act of rebellion. Someone with immense skill and knowledge of the Empire's weaknesses was behind it. And the whispers he had heard matched a name he thought was a myth, the Baba Yaga. The Baba Yaga did not act for glory. She moved silently, watching, studying her targets. She knew the Empire's weaknesses intimately, not because of brute force, but because she understood human nature and how to use strategy where others relied only on firepower. Every mission she undertook weakened the Empire, not just physically, but mentally. Officers began to second-guess orders, soldiers hesitated in fear, and the once confident leadership began to panic. Across the colonies, humans noticed subtle changes. There were small victories. Supply lines reached settlements safely, despite Imperial interference. Communication channels stayed open where the Empire expected them blocked. And tiny bases previously under threat were defended without a single loss. People started believing that the generals' deaths, while tragic, were not the end of humanity's fight. The Baba Yaga's presence reminded them that justice could come, that courage could return, and that fear was never permanent. Somewhere in the Empire's central command, the planners grew frustrated. They had underestimated human resilience, assuming that the loss of 3 leaders would destroy morale. Instead, morale had shifted. Fear had begun to turn into determination. The officers who had once been certain of their control were now cautious, hesitant, and unsure. Their arrogance had blinded them to one fact: humans, when united by loss and injustice, could achieve the impossible. The Baba Yaga, moving quietly through the shadows, began focusing on the people responsible for ordering the executions. She studied them, learned their routines, and prepared her moves. She was not just seeking revenge for the generals. She wanted to expose the corruption and cruelty of the Empire. Every action she took was designed to remind the galaxy that humans could not be controlled by threats alone. On a distant colony, families gathered to hear news from the edge of the Empire's control. They were careful to speak in whispers, but hope was visible in their eyes. Stories of the Baba Yaga's actions reached them first as rumors, then as confirmation of change. Children asked questions about the generals, about the ghostly figure who seemed to protect humans unseen. Adults told stories carefully, teaching lessons about courage, loyalty, and the importance of standing up against injustice. The Empire's propaganda could not counter these whispers. Every report of the Baba Yaga's precise strikes reminded people that power alone was not enough. The human spirit, determination, and intelligence could never be entirely suppressed. Fear had its limits, but hope had no bounds. Meanwhile, the Baba Yaga's plans continued. She had already mapped the paths of those responsible for the generals' deaths, learning the patterns of their movements, the weaknesses in their defenses, and the mistakes they had made out of arrogance. She knew that the Empire's reliance on intimidation and rules would be their undoing. Humans were unpredictable, resourceful, and bold when pushed to extremes. And she intended to use those qualities to restore justice. Reports began to circulate that certain Imperial officers had disappeared mysteriously. Bases once thought secure were found abandoned. Orders went unanswered. In some sectors, the Empire struggled to maintain control. Panic grew quietly but steadily. Humans, inspired by the Baba Yaga's actions, started to feel that the impossible might actually be possible. The galaxy was changing. People realized that courage could spread even when fear seemed overwhelming. The 3 fallen generals, once victims of cruelty, had sparked a chain of events that no one in the Empire could have predicted. Their deaths, tragic as they were, had created a ripple through human space. And in the shadows, the Baba Yaga was moving quietly to transform that ripple into a wave. Her reputation alone began to influence humans and enemies alike. People who had lost hope started acting with courage, knowing that someone was watching over them, guiding them, and protecting them without ever showing herself. The Empire, on the other hand, was becoming paranoid, second-guessing every decision and fearing the invisible hand that was dismantling their control piece by piece. And so, as the second part of the story unfolded, humanity found new strength in the shadows of loss. The generals' deaths had not been in vain. They had reminded humans of their courage, their resilience, and the power of justice. And the Baba Yaga, returning from legend, had begun a mission that would challenge the might of the Galactic Empire in ways no one could have imagined. The galaxy was no longer silent. Fear was still present, but hope had returned. Humans remembered that courage was not only in leaders, but also in the choices of ordinary people and the actions of those willing to fight when it seemed impossible. And as the Baba Yaga prepared her next move, the Empire realized too late that the rules of control had changed. Humanity was waking up, and nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The Empire, once so confident, was beginning to feel the tremors of something it could not control. Supply lines failed, communication networks were broken, and officers began vanishing without a trace. Everywhere, whispers of a ghostly figure circulated, the Baba Yaga, but no one knew her full plan. She was moving like a shadow through human space, precise, deliberate, and unstoppable. The generals' deaths had ignited anger and grief, but they had also lit a fire of determination. Humans across colonies, small stations, and outposts began to act with renewed courage. Soldiers who had once been hesitant now trained harder, and civilians who had feared for their safety began helping one another in ways that strengthened their communities. The Empire could strike with fleets and weapons, but it could not erase courage or hope. The Baba Yaga did not act for recognition. She did not make announcements or leave messages claiming responsibility. Her work was quiet, meticulous, and often invisible. She targeted only those who had played a role in the execution of the generals, moving through heavily guarded sectors without leaving a trace. Officers who had believed themselves untouchable began to realize that someone had intimate knowledge of their routines, their weaknesses, and their fears. In one particular sector, a high-ranking officer had grown confident after years of controlling colonies and monitoring human forces. He believed that with the generals gone, the human forces were broken. But in the span of a few nights, every one of his supply depots had been sabotaged, communication lines disrupted, and his personal security team found unconscious, restrained, and humiliated. Panic began to creep into his mind. He had trained for countless battles and had never experienced an opponent so elusive, so calculating, so mercilessly precise. The officer began calling for reinforcements from nearby sectors. Entire fleets were mobilized, scanning for intruders, checking security footage, and trying to track down this mysterious threat. Yet the Baba Yaga was always one step ahead. She never struck in obvious ways. Every move she made seemed designed to confuse the Empire, make them doubt themselves, and force them to question everything they had relied upon for decades. Meanwhile, in the human colonies, ordinary people began noticing small changes. Supplies once delayed now arrived on time despite imperial interference. Communication lines, previously unreliable due to Empire surveillance, functioned as if guided by someone watching over them. Soldiers reported that orders previously ignored were suddenly being fulfilled with efficiency. The Baba Yaga's presence, though unseen, was giving people hope and the courage to resist. Across the galaxy, rumors of her return spread quickly. Some said she was a warrior who had never aged, a human with skills far beyond ordinary limits. Others believed she was more than human, a shadow, a spirit, a force that existed only to bring justice. The truth did not matter as much as the belief. The Empire's grip, once thought absolute, was beginning to weaken, not because of battles won, but because of the human spirit being reminded of its own power. In a small training facility on a remote colony, Young recruits were being prepared for the worst. The instructors, veterans of countless battles, spoke of the generals' courage, their strategic minds, and their unwavering sense of justice. They told stories of the Baba Yaga, careful to keep details vague, but emphasizing that humanity was never alone. Courage could come in many forms, and even the most feared enemy could be challenged by those willing to act. The Empire, growing frustrated and fearful, began conducting investigations. They analyzed every attack, every sabotage, every disruption, trying to find a pattern, a clue, anything that would reveal their enemy. But the Baba Yaga did not move like a typical opponent. She was unpredictable, yet deliberate. She struck where the Empire was weakest, exploited arrogance and overconfidence, and left no evidence of her presence. The officers began to fear that they were facing someone who understood the Empire better than they understood themselves. On another planet, civilians gathered quietly in meeting halls and public squares. They shared stories of the generals, discussed the recent disruptions, and began planning ways to support each other. Some volunteered to assist in transporting supplies, while others secretly monitored imperial movements to provide intelligence. The Baba Yaga's actions were teaching them courage, not through direct orders, but through inspiration. Humans began to see that even small actions, when done together, could challenge the Empire in ways they had never imagined. The Empire's response became more aggressive. They sent fleets to patrol areas where the Baba Yaga had struck. They deployed elite soldiers to hunt for her. They tried to manipulate humans through fear and propaganda, emphasizing the consequences of rebellion. Yet with every action, they underestimated human adaptability and resilience. The humans were learning quickly, adapting to threats, sharing information secretly, and supporting one another in ways that could not be crushed by fleets or weapons. The Baba Yaga, observing all of this, moved carefully. She did not need to rush. She knew the Empire's impatience would be its weakness. Each time they overreacted, they made mistakes. Each time they assumed humans were too weak to act, they exposed vulnerabilities. And every small act of sabotage or disruption reinforced hope among the humans, reminding them that even in darkness, courage could survive. In one of the Empire's command centers, officers began arguing among themselves. Some wanted to increase patrols and use force. Others argued for restraint, fearing that too much aggression would only embolden the humans. Fear, doubt, and uncertainty had never been so widespread in the Empire's history. The Baba Yaga did not need to appear in person. Her influence had already shaken the Empire from within. Across human space, families continued to live under the shadow of fear, yet their hearts carried hope. Parents told children of the general's courage. Teachers spoke of loyalty, bravery, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Small communities helped each other survive attacks or shortages. And in every quiet act of courage, the Baba Yaga's presence could be felt. She had shown that one person, with determination and skill, could make a difference, not through intimidation, but through example and action. In remote regions, spies and scouts reported strange activity. Imperial patrols were being disrupted, strategic points found abandoned, and officers caught unaware. The Empire's belief in absolute control was eroding, replaced with panic and confusion. The Baba Yaga's campaign was proving that intelligence, patience, and courage could challenge even the most powerful military force in the galaxy. That the humans who had once been afraid began to act with confidence. They started defending their colonies, protecting civilians, and planning small strikes against imperial outposts. Each act, though minor, added to a growing sense of collective resistance. They knew the generals had fallen, but their legacy inspired action. The Baba Yaga's careful guidance, though invisible, reminded them that even ordinary humans could achieve extraordinary results. And while the Empire focused on brute force, The Baba Yaga's strategy was human-centered. She understood their behavior, their habits, and their weaknesses. She did not rely on overwhelming numbers or massive firepower. Instead, she used intelligence, precision, and timing. She exploited arrogance, overconfidence, and predictable patterns. Every strike weakened the empire's authority, and every act of courage strengthened human unity. As the days passed, more reports came in of the Baba Yaga's work. Officers responsible for the general's deaths were found missing, or their operations disrupted. Fleets sent to intercept her returned empty-handed. Colonies that had been silent began reporting small victories. Every incident built confidence among humans, and fear within the empire. By now, it was clear that the galaxy was changing. The empire could no longer rely solely on fear and power to maintain control. Humans were awakening to their own strength, inspired by both the loss of the generals and the unseen guidance of the Baba Yaga. People who had once accepted their circumstances were now choosing action, refusing to be silent in the face of injustice. The Baba Yaga moved forward, calm and calculated. She understood the empire's greatest weapon was not its fleets or weapons, but its ability to instill fear. By striking strategically, she dismantled their confidence, turning fear into opportunity. She showed humanity that courage was contagious, and that even the smallest actions could have a ripple effect across the galaxy. As part 3 of the story drew to a close, the galaxy had changed. Fear still existed, but it was no longer the only force in human space. Courage, determination, and hope had returned, growing stronger with each passing day. The generals' deaths, though tragic, had sparked a movement that could not be silenced. And the Baba Yaga, moving unseen, was shaping events in ways the empire could never predict. Humans across the galaxy began to believe in themselves again. They remembered the generals, honored their sacrifices, and saw that courage was not limited to leaders or warriors. Even ordinary people, when united by purpose and justice, could challenge the most powerful empire. The Baba Yaga's return had proven that one determined human could inspire millions, and that the power of hope, combined with skill and strategy, was unstoppable. The galaxy, once dominated by fear, now had a spark of rebellion. Humans. The galaxy had begun to change. Across human space, whispers of the Baba Yaga's return had become a quiet chorus of hope. Her actions were no longer unseen. Subtle signs of her presence were everywhere. Supplies reached distant colonies that had been cut off. Communication lines that the empire had thought completely secure now functioned again. Minor bases once thought lost to the empire's control were holding strong. Each success, no matter how small, reminded humans that the generals' deaths had not ended their fight. The empire, on the other hand, was beginning to panic. The disruption of their supply lines and intelligence networks had escalated beyond anything they had experienced before. Officers argued among themselves, blaming each other for every mistake. Fleets sent to patrol key sectors returned empty-handed. Those responsible for the generals' deaths were beginning to feel the first real fear of their lives. They had acted with confidence, believing that humanity would bow under intimidation. But the Baba Yaga was proving them wrong, one calculated strike at a time. Her approach was methodical. She did not attack recklessly, nor did she seek chaos for its own sake. She studied the empire's patterns, noting the weaknesses in leadership, the arrogance in planning, and the blind spots that came from overconfidence. Every mission she undertook was precise. Every strike served a purpose, teaching humans courage while exposing the empire's flaws. In a quiet corner of a busy colony, a group of young soldiers gathered around a small hollow screen. They watched reports of the Baba Yaga's movements, fascinated and inspired. These soldiers had been trained in strategy and combat, but until now, They had never believed that one person could make such a difference against the vast might of the empire. Her actions taught them something more important. Courage and intelligence could outweigh numbers. The empire responded with increased force. Entire fleets were mobilized to track and capture the Baba Yaga. Patrols intensified. Security checks became constant. Officers demanded stricter surveillance of human settlements, hoping to catch the phantom before she struck again. But the more they tried to control, the more they revealed their weakness. The empire's overconfidence, its reliance on intimidation, was turning into a liability on one heavily fortified station. An officer who had been instrumental in the execution of the generals paced nervously. Reports of disruptions had reached him, each one more alarming than the last. Supplies vanished from storage bays, communications were interrupted, and even his own security detail had reported mysterious intrusions. He had believed himself untouchable, yet the Baba Yaga had proven that even the most careful plans could be undone. The officer began to realize that fear was not just spreading among humans. It had begun to infiltrate the empire itself. Meanwhile, in human colonies across the galaxy, ordinary citizens began taking action. Farmers and laborers transported food and medical supplies to isolated settlements. Engineers worked to repair communications damaged by the empire. Soldiers coordinated quietly to defend their people. Each action, though small, built a growing sense of unity. The Baba Yaga had taught them an essential lesson. Courage was not just in generals and warriors. It could be found in every human willing to act. In the empire's capital, panic grew. Officers were unsure of how to respond. Every strategy seemed to fail. Every attempt to restore control only led to more confusion. Fear, once a tool of control, had begun to backfire. Humans were learning to rely on one another, to adapt, and to fight back in ways the empire could not predict. And the Baba Yaga was the catalyst, a shadowy force that reminded them all of what was possible. The Baba Yaga herself moved carefully. She understood that the empire's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness: overconfidence. By striking where they believed themselves secure, she created doubt. By moving silently, she taught patience. By targeting those responsible for injustice, she reminded the galaxy that cruelty could not go unpunished. Every action, no matter how small, was part of a larger plan. In one remote observation post, a group of scouts noticed unusual activity. Imperial ships were moving erratically, as if chasing ghosts. Supply convoys were being intercepted, but the attackers were never caught. Security cameras recorded strange figures slipping through corridors, leaving no trace. The scouts shared what they had seen with human authorities, their reports carefully worded to avoid detection. The evidence pointed to a single conclusion: the Baba Yaga had returned, and she was hunting those who had betrayed the generals. Across colonies, communities began to feel a new sense of confidence. They shared information secretly, coordinated small actions against the empire, and inspired one another with stories of bravery. The generals' deaths, tragic as they were, had sparked a movement. Humans began to see that even in the darkest times, courage could prevail. And in every whispered story, the name of the Baba Yaga grew, a symbol of resilience, justice, and hope. The empire, desperate to maintain control, increased its security measures. Patrols became constant, monitoring intensified, and fleets were dispatched to key sectors. But every action taken in fear created new vulnerabilities. The Baba Yaga, always careful, struck precisely where the empire had overreached. Officers who had acted with confidence were now cautious, second-guessing every order. The once absolute control of the empire was unraveling strand by strand under the quiet but unstoppable force of human courage. On a small training base, instructors worked tirelessly with young recruits. They emphasized strategy, teamwork, and resilience. Each lesson carried a message. Humanity was not defeated. The generals had fallen, but their spirit lived on. Every small victory, every act of courage, added to a growing sense of unity. And every young recruit trained in those halls would carry the lessons forward, ensuring that the Baba Yaga's influence spread far beyond her immediate actions. In the heart of human space, civilians quietly resisted in ways that mattered. They shared food, helped repair damaged equipment, and provided shelter to those in need. Every act of kindness, every effort to support one another, became part of the growing tide of resistance. Humans began to understand that bravery was not measured only on battlefields. It was also in the choices they made every day to stand against oppression. The Baba Yaga's strategy was not just about vengeance, it was about teaching. She showed that one person, with skill, courage, and determination, could inspire millions. Her actions created ripples, small disruptions that grew into waves of resistance. The empire, despite all its technology, fleets, and soldiers, was being undone by the simplest force in the universe, the human spirit. Officers responsible for the generals' deaths were beginning to fear for their lives. Some took extra precautions, others tried to hide, and a few attempted to strike back, believing that the Baba Yaga was vulnerable. Each attempt failed. Every strike she made was deliberate, every disruption calculated. The empire had not faced an opponent like her in decades, if ever. Their overconfidence had blinded them to a truth they could not fight with weapons alone: courage. Intelligence and determination could never be defeated by force alone. As the days passed, humans across the galaxy began to take notice of the subtle victories around them. A single supply convoy arriving safely could inspire hope. A damaged communications relay, repaired overnight, could change the morale of an entire sector. Each small success reminded people that the Baba Yaga's actions were not random, they were purposeful. And they were teaching humans that courage could thrive even in impossible circumstances. The empire grew frantic. Fleets were moved, outposts reinforced, and patrols doubled, yet nothing stopped the tide of disruption. Fear and doubt spread among officers like wildfire. For the first time, humans were dictating the pace of the conflict, proving that determination and intelligence could challenge even the most powerful military force in the galaxy. And the Baba Yaga continued her careful march toward the heart of the empire. She knew that the final confrontation would not be immediate, that patience and planning were essential. Every disruption, every act of courage she inspired, every victory in human settlements was preparing the galaxy for what was coming next. The empire was unraveling from within, and humanity was awakening to its own strength. Communities learned to rely on each other. Soldiers learned to trust their instincts and intelligence. And officers within the empire began questioning every decision. Fear, once the empire's greatest weapon, had become its greatest vulnerability. And in the quiet shadows, the Baba Yaga moved, a symbol of justice and a reminder that the cost of cruelty could never be ignored. By the end of this phase, the galaxy had shifted. Humans were no longer passive observers. They were active participants in shaping their destiny. The generals' deaths, though tragic, had sparked something far greater than grief. They had ignited courage, determination, and hope. And while the empire still held weapons and fleets, it was losing control over the most important factor in war, the human spirit. The Baba Yaga's path was clear. The empire had underestimated her, underestimated humanity, and underestimated the power of justice. Her mission was not complete, but the foundations had been laid. The humans she had inspired were ready to fight in ways the empire could not predict, and the officers who had acted with arrogance were beginning to feel the first. The empire had grown frantic. Every move they made to stop the Baba Yaga failed. Every fleet sent, every patrol ordered, every officer mobilized came back with reports of confusion, disruption, or nothing at all. The general's deaths, meant to silence humans, had instead awakened a courage the Empire had not counted on. Across human space, ordinary people, soldiers, and leaders were beginning to act in ways that surprised even themselves. The galaxy was alive with quiet resistance, and the Baba Yaga had reached the point she had been preparing for all along. The masterminds behind the generals, executions the high-ranking officers who had plotted and signed every order, were now within her reach. They had hidden in the heart of the Empire, believing that their power, security, and distance would protect them. They had not anticipated that one human, moving with precision and patience, could dismantle their plans and hunt them across sectors. She moved quietly through the shadows of Imperial space. Security was tight, yet she bypassed it with ease. Cameras recorded nothing, sensors detected nothing, and officers believed their systems were flawless. The Baba Yaga had studied their patterns for weeks, learning their routines, weaknesses, and habits. She did not act recklessly. Every step was calculated to strike at the heart of their arrogance while protecting innocent lives. The first officer she encountered had been directly involved in the tribunal that condemned the generals. He had believed the executions would cement his authority, that fear would be enough to control human populations. Yet now he was trapped in his own hub, unable to call for help. Doors locked, communications cut, and security teams incapacitated. He realized, with growing terror, that the legend of the Baba Yaga was real, and he was at her mercy. The confrontation was quiet, precise, and deliberate. The officer's attempts to bargain, to plead, or to hide were met with silence. There was no anger in her eyes, no desire for cruelty. There was only the justice that had been denied to the generals, and a reminder that those who betrayed humanity could not escape the consequences. By the time the Empire realized he was missing, there was no evidence left behind. Only a warning. Actions against humans carried consequences, and courage could not be suppressed by fear. The second officer was even more arrogant, having orchestrated the propaganda campaign to justify the executions. He had built walls, created secret defenses, and believed himself untouchable. Yet the Baba Yaga knew the Empire better than they knew themselves. She moved through his defenses with patience, disabling security systems and leaving traces that misled his mind. By the time he realized the perimeter had been breached, it was too late. He found himself face to face with the very force he had dismissed as myth. Humans across the galaxy were inspired by these actions, though they did not know the details. Stories spread quietly among colonies and small stations, officers missing, imperial plans failing, supply chains restored. Even in sectors far from the heart of the Empire, people began acting with courage, inspired by the notion that the Baba Yaga was fighting for them, fighting for justice, and proving that even the most powerful enemy could be challenged. The final officer, the one who had personally signed the execution orders for the generals, was the most dangerous. He had underestimated humanity and had grown complacent, believing that the galaxy was under his control. His hub was heavily fortified, with fleets surrounding the sector and layers of defenses designed to deter any attack. Yet the Baba Yaga had planned carefully. She did not rush. She observed patterns, waited for the perfect moment, and struck with precision as she infiltrated his stronghold. Officers scrambled to respond. Fleets were ordered to intercept. Security protocols were activated. Alarms blared throughout the citadel. Yet the Baba Yaga moved calmly through the chaos. Every security measure, every defensive tactic was anticipated. The Empire's most powerful officer realized too late that their intelligence had failed. The very arrogance that had allowed the generals to be executed was now the reason for his vulnerability. The confrontation was not about anger or revenge. It was about balance and justice. The Baba Yaga did not torture or humiliate unnecessarily. She made the officer understand the consequences of his actions, the lives lost due to his cruelty, and the courage of those he had tried to silence. By the time she left, the officer was shaken, his confidence shattered, and the Empire's authority over human space was weakened. Meanwhile, across the colonies, humans noticed subtle victories. Supply lines were restored, communication networks repaired, and isolated settlements no longer feared being cut off. Ordinary people began acting with courage. Soldiers who had been uncertain of their capabilities now made bold decisions. Civilians worked together to support each other, proving that courage was not limited to warriors. The Baba Yaga's actions were teaching a larger lesson. Justice and courage could ripple through human space, inspiring ordinary humans to extraordinary acts. The Empire struggled to respond. Every plan to contain the Baba Yaga failed. Officers responsible for enforcing fear began doubting their power. Fleets became cautious, patrols hesitant, and security protocols increasingly rigid yet ineffective. The very fear they had relied on as a tool to control humans now worked against them. Human determination, intelligence, and unity had become a force the Empire could not fully understand or suppress. Back in human space, young recruits and seasoned soldiers alike studied reports of her actions. They learned strategy, observation, and the power of careful planning. Communities shared stories, teaching lessons of bravery and loyalty. Every human who had witnessed the Baba Yaga's work began to understand that courage was contagious. Even the smallest actions, helping a neighbor, defending a settlement, delivering supplies, were now part of a larger movement inspired by justice. The Baba Yaga did not linger. Once her objective was achieved, she vanished as quietly as she had appeared. Her goal had never been fame or recognition. She acted to restore balance, to honor the courage of the generals, and to remind humans that injustice could not stand unchecked. Her presence created waves that reached far beyond the immediate impact, showing the Empire and all of humanity that one determined person could change the course of events. The Empire, shaken to its core, realized that fear alone could not maintain control. The officers who had executed the generals were no longer untouchable. Their arrogance had been their downfall. The galaxy had begun to see that human courage, intelligence, and unity were far more powerful than any fleet or weapon. The Baba Yaga had reminded the galaxy that justice was not just a word. It was action, careful, deliberate, and unstoppable. Across human space, hope spread like wildfire. People began to reclaim their voices, stand taller, and take action where they once felt powerless. The generals' deaths, tragic though they were, had ignited a movement. Courage and resilience became contagious. Communities supported one another. Soldiers fought with renewed determination, and civilians took pride in their role in defending human space. The Baba Yaga's work was not complete, but her actions had created momentum that the Empire could not contain. Humans had learned that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and justice could prevail. The Empire's control, once absolute, had been shaken. Fear had been replaced with determination. Doubt had replaced arrogance. And across the galaxy, humans began to understand the power they held when they acted together. Inspired by the memory of their leaders and the quiet force guiding them from the shadows. By the end of this phase, the galaxy had changed. The Empire still held weapons, fleets, and technology, but it no longer commanded absolute fear. Humans had awakened to their own strength. Communities acted with courage. Soldiers made bold decisions, and the lessons of the Baba Yaga were being carried forward by countless ordinary humans. The general's sacrifice had not been in vain, and the Baba Yaga, moving unseen, continued her mission. She had delivered justice to those responsible for the generals' deaths and had shown the galaxy that courage and determination could never be destroyed by fear. The Empire had been reminded of a simple truth. Humans, united by purpose and guided by justice, could challenge even the greatest power in the galaxy. The galaxy was no longer silent. Humans had found their voice again, their courage, and their strength. The Baba Yaga had proven that even one person, acting with skill, intelligence, and purpose, could inspire millions and change the course of history. And while the Empire still existed, it would never again underestimate the force of human courage, the desire for justice, and the spirit of those willing to fight for what is right. The galaxy was changing. After weeks of quiet disruption and precise strikes, the Empire had begun to crumble from within. The officers responsible for the generals' deaths had been confronted, their arrogance replaced with fear. Supply lines, communications, and minor outposts were no longer under total imperial control. Across human space, courage was growing, hope spreading like wildfire, and the Baba Yaga's presence, though unseen, had inspired an entire generation. Humans had begun to act in ways they never thought possible. Soldiers made daring maneuvers to protect settlements. Engineers repaired systems under constant threat, and ordinary people coordinated quietly to move supplies and support one another. Every small act of courage became part of a larger movement, showing that the Empire's weapons and fleets, no matter how advanced, could not destroy the human spirit. In the central sectors of the Empire, panic was widespread. Fleets once considered unstoppable now hesitated. Officers second-guessed orders, and confidence had turned to anxiety. The propaganda campaigns designed to suppress human resistance were failing. People whispered the name of the Baba Yaga with awe, sharing stories of her precision and bravery. The Empire had believed that fear could control humanity, but it had underestimated something far more powerful: determination, rooted in justice and courage. The Baba Yaga herself continued to move quietly. Her mission was almost complete, but she knew that timing was everything. She did not rush into the heart of the Empire recklessly. She watched, studied, and waited for the perfect moment to ensure that the humans' rising courage would not be wasted. Every action she took was calculated to inspire, to protect, and to strike fear into those who had once believed themselves untouchable. In a remote outpost, young soldiers trained rigorously. Instructors told them stories of the fallen generals, emphasizing courage, strategy, and loyalty. They spoke of the Baba Yaga, not as a mythical figure, but as proof that intelligence, precision, and moral strength could challenge even the most powerful forces. Every lesson carried a message. Courage was not a gift, it was a choice. And humans, when acting together, could accomplish the impossible. The Empire's central command was in chaos. Officers debated endlessly about how to respond. Every attempt to track or trap the Baba Yaga failed. Fleets were sent to key sectors, only to find empty bases or sabotaged equipment. The officers' overconfidence had been their downfall. They had believed themselves untouchable. But one human, moving with purpose and skill, had reminded them of a simple truth: courage and justice could not be controlled or destroyed. Meanwhile, in colonies far from the heart of the Empire, ordinary humans were beginning to reclaim their lives. Civilians shared resources, defended settlements, and learned to communicate securely to avoid imperial detection. They discovered the power of unity. Even in sectors without a direct presence of the Baba Yaga, her influence was felt. The lessons she had taught through her actions inspired humans to act with bravery in their own ways. The Empire's attempts to strike back only revealed their weaknesses. Panic among officers grew, fleets hesitated to engage, and soldiers began questioning orders. The very fear they had relied upon to control humans now worked against them. And humans, inspired by the Baba Yaga, did not need large armies to resist. They relied on intelligence, courage, and unity, qualities the Empire could not suppress. The The final act of the Baba Yaga's mission was near. She had targeted all officers directly responsible for the general's deaths and disrupted key imperial operations. Now, she prepared to deliver a final demonstration to remind the galaxy of the consequences of cruelty and arrogance. This was not about vengeance alone. It was about teaching, inspiring, and restoring balance. Justice would be visible, precise, an undeniable dot in the central command hub. Alarms rang as the Baba Yaga infiltrated with precision. Security systems failed, patrols were bypassed, and the officers were left helpless. One by one, those who had acted with cruelty were confronted. Each encounter was carefully measured, not for spectacle, but to show the impact of their actions. The general's deaths had been intended to instill fear, but the Baba Yaga turned that fear back on those who had caused it. She moved quietly, leaving no trace of chaos. No unnecessary harm was done to innocents. Her actions were deliberate, precise, and symbolic. The officers, once arrogant and untouchable, were forced to confront the truth. Cruelty and arrogance carried consequences. Every step she took weakened the Empire's morale while simultaneously strengthening human courage. Across human space, news of the Empire's failure began to spread. Stories circulated of officers missing, bases abandoned, and fleets hesitant to act. Even those far from the front lines felt a sense of renewed hope. Communities shared what they could, defended their settlements, and coordinated with each other in ways they had never imagined. Courage was no longer confined to warriors. It lived in every human who acted to protect, resist, and inspire. The Empire had underestimated the power of human determination. They had thought fleets and weapons alone could control the galaxy. They had not counted on intelligence, precision, patience, and moral courage. They had not understood that humans, inspired by justice and guided by example, could rise even in the darkest times. The Baba Yaga had reminded the galaxy that fear could be countered, that unity could overcome power, and that courage was contagious dot in one training facility. A young soldier completed a risky maneuver to defend a critical supply route. The instructors praised the initiative, pointing out that bravery was not limited to generals or legendary figures. Humans learned that courage, even in small actions, had ripple effects. The Baba Yaga had shown them that individual acts, combined with intelligence and patience, could shift the balance of power. The Empire's officers, now shaken to their core, tried desperately to regain control. But it was too late. The movement they had attempted to suppress had grown beyond any single fleet or outpost. Humans had rediscovered their voice, their courage, and their strength. Every act of defiance, every cooperative effort, every lesson learned from the Baba Yaga added to a momentum the Empire could not contain. And then, as quietly as she had appeared, the Baba Yaga left. Her mission had been accomplished. The officers responsible for injustice had been confronted. The Empire's confidence had been shattered. Humans had been reminded of their courage and potential. Communities across human space were stronger, more united, and more resilient than ever before. The galaxy had changed. Fear still existed, but it no longer ruled human hearts. Courage, determination, and justice had taken root, spreading through every settlement, station, and colony. Humans had learned that even in the darkest times, they could act, resist, and inspire others. The legacy of the generals, honored through the Baba Yaga's mission, would live on in every brave act, every choice to stand for justice, and every moment of courage. Even within the Empire, the lesson was clear. Fear alone could not control humans. Power alone could not suppress courage. The officers who had acted with arrogance had been shown their limits. And the galaxy had seen, through the Baba Yaga's actions, that human determination, intelligence, and unity were forces no empire could fully dominate. Across human space, people celebrated quietly. not with parades or grand ceremonies, but with renewed determination to protect one another, rebuild communities, and defend what was right. Soldiers trained harder, engineers innovated more boldly, and civilians learned to rely on each other. Every human, in every small action, carried forward the lessons of courage and justice. The Baba Yaga, now a legend in human space, faded back into the shadows. Her presence had been a force of change, a catalyst that reminded humans of their own potential. She had honored the fallen generals, confronted injustice, and inspired a galaxy to rise. And though her work was unseen by most, the ripples of her actions would continue to shape the future of humanity. The Empire, once feared as unstoppable, had been reminded of a simple truth. The human spirit cannot be crushed by fleets, weapons, or fear. Courage, intelligence, and unity are forces far greater than any army. And humans, inspired by justice and guided by the example of the Baba Yaga, had awakened to the power they had always possessed. In the end, the galaxy had changed forever. The generals' deaths had been a tragedy, but their legacy lived on. The Baba Yaga had returned to restore balance, to teach courage, and to remind humans that even one determined individual could ignite a movement. Fear had been challenged. Hope had returned. And humanity, united in courage and justice, was stronger than ever before. The stars seemed brighter now, not because the empire had weakened, but because the human spirit had grown. Across colonies, stations, and settlements, humans looked to the future with determination, ready to face whatever challenges came next. And somewhere in the shadows, the Baba Yaga watched, satisfied that her mission had reminded the galaxy of a fundamental truth. Courage cannot be destroyed, and justice, when pursued with intelligence and purpose, is unstoppable.